I was struck by a sentence right at the end of chapter 3, where he's talking about the people in the Bible, Paul and whatnot. And he says, they didn't simply believe strongly in God, they knew God. Mm. And part of what he's talking about is he's going from his history to his conversions to his convictions, is he's talking about how he came to know God. And that's what we want to talk about today, is how do we come to know God? Now, that's something that's been explored a lot in religion, sometimes in ways that we have rejected, right? Because somebody said, this is the right way to know God. And you have to have that come to Jesus moment like I did, or whatever it happens to be. But I want us to essentially take some time today to share with each other how we came to know God. How we do that is important. It was interesting this week as I read a scripture that I have read literally for decades and saw it differently than I ever had before this week. And it's a scripture that he used in Acts chapter 17. And he talks about, it's that one that he where he quotes where Paul quotes the ancient Greek philosopher who says, in him we live and move and have our being. Right? How many have heard that phrase? Right? And he uses that when he's talking about panentheism. Okay? That God is there in all the things that we are doing. And I've known that scripture a long time. And I've known the other part of that scripture even longer. 40 some years ago, I just arrived in Argentina. I was brand new in a country that was completely different than anything that I'd ever heard of, been in, experienced. And a man named Hugh B. Brown, I was reading a talk by him. Now, you guys don't know Hugh B. Brown because he's a Mormon theologian, but everybody in Mormonism knows Hugh B. Brown. Huge, huge name. So I'm reading that, and he quotes the beginning of the passage that ends with, in him we live and move and have our being. And it changed my life. And here's what happens. It talks about Paul going to Athens, and he stands in the Areopagus. And he says, Athenians, I see how extremely religious you are. For as I went through the city, I saw how carefully you placed all the different objects that you worship. And I found among them an altar with this inscription, to an unknown God. And then it says, he whom you ignorantly worship, declare I unto you. And it changed my life, because I knew all about God. I knew God well from all the stuff I'd been taught my whole life. I knew Mormon God really well. And suddenly Paul was saying, but there's an unknown God who we also declare to each other. A larger than what I know God. And as I began to preach my God to these foreign people that I was working with, it changed the way I looked at them and related to them. That was one of my moments of conviction and change. That's where I want us to delve into today, is how has the sacred changed you? Because a conversion is about moving from what you used to be to what it is that God is calling you to be. And the hard part is it often means leaving something behind, but it's in favor of gaining something else, grasping hold of a new way of seeing, being, acting, relating. That's what we're going to talk about today. And out of that flows a conviction. So my conviction out of that moment is that the God that I know is not the whole God. And that was huge for me, because Mormons teach the whole God really well. here's everything you need to know, right? And I knew Mormon theology, Mormon ways of looking at things really well. And to be able to open my mind to say that that's not everything that there is, it took me down a road that I'd never gone before. I'd been on the road where you know everything. And suddenly I was on the road where there's unknowable. And ultimately helped my conversion away from Mormonism and towards where I am now. So that's what we want to delve into is about that. And to do that, he talks about the panentheism, which is where he says that everything is in God. Not that God is everything. That's pantheism. Panentheism is that everything is in God, that God is not a being set aside from all the things you experience, but that as we experience each other, we experience God. As we walk through a calm forest, we experience God. As we hear the crashing of the waves on a beach, we hear God. That God is in all things and can be experienced in all things. So how is it that God has done that for you? Now, the thing that gets in the way of that, not gets in the way, but makes it challenging for us, is that thing that he talked about between immanence and transcendence. Did you get those two words? Immanence is that where God is close to me. Transcendent is that where God is more than me. Because God is in everything and God is in me doesn't mean God is me. Because God is also you. God is also, and so while I can feel the closeness and need to feel that closeness, I also have to feel that beyond that's there. And we usually err moving too close to one or the other. So I have too much of a transcendent God and forget that God can be close, or I have too much of an immanent God and forget that God is more than just that immanent God. Okay, so which way do you think in your lifetime you've failed? Have you had too close of a God or too distant of a God? Which way have you failed? Now, if you're like most of us, you've probably done both, but can you think of one time when God has surprised you by being the opposite of what you thought?
I guess I'll jump in here. The main sort of change in my perception of God came through Marcus Borg, and it was like this wonderful revelation for me, because I was probably could be described as one of those people, I've forgotten which category he puts them into, but who attended church because I'd always attended church. But there were a lot of things about what I was hearing in church that were troubling to me, the inerrancy of the Bible, and even more importantly, this idea of a God, a male figure up in the sky, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a Presbyterian minister who suggested Marcus Borg to us. And in fact, when I started reading it, I kind of went back to the minister, a dear man that we loved a lot, said, Gordon, so if you accept this, believe that, how come you don't preach that way? And he basically said, because the congregation isn't ready for it.
Exactly.
They wanted to hear the traditional, rather than but he said, but that was taught in seminary. Right. And it was just mind-blowing for me.
Yeah.
And it was the first time I began to feel like it was okay to think that God was something more than, other than some figure in the sky, some male figure in the sky. So, and I guess I've continued to feel that God is within and without since then, basically.
Good.
That,
And that's exactly the type of thing that we need to do. The hard part is that like Gordon, it is really simple to only say, you're only ready for this much, or I'm only ready to give you this much because I'm afraid of what you'll do if I give you more, or whatever it happens to be, right? We have all these reasons why we hold on to this size of a God. But we have to step towards that God that Paul knew. And Paul thought, he hated seeing all those gods, but he knew that what it was recognizing is that there's a God, there's larger God than what they know, right? Larger God than what he knows, larger God than what we know. How about the rest of you?
Well, I could jump in at this point. I think I was also back in Ogden Presbyterian Church when there was a study about David, King David going on. And King David and I didn't get along really well.
I like arguing with some of the characters in the Bible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I couldn't understand why God eventually made David the rock upon which Israel was founded.
Mm-hmm.
And I was trying to be good, and I couldn't understand about this person given wealth, position, power, and a very teeny tiny moral compass. And,
He was human.
yeah, I could not accept him. But then all of a sudden I realized, hey, God not only accepts David, but also brings about an incredible change in him. And what was I doing cutting David out of my pantheon of stars too, because he is really pretty much me. And so that was when God became a good deal bigger to me than ever before. That people who I thought were absolutely lower than pond scum appearing in the Bible were actually those in which God resided. And that gave me a target to shoot for. I still have difficulty with it, but at least I know that the acceptance of God is beyond all that I could understand and know. So that's when I think I first hit that important conviction, and it opened my eyes to the full depth and breadth of just what the numinous is.
Mm-hmm. Good.
It's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
No, I think that's a great story. I had a not dissimilar one. Mine was with Jacob, you know, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I also saw him as pretty much scum of the earth, and yet he was one of the great patriarchs. And what was even worse is Jacob is the Hebraic translation of my own name, James.
Yeah.
And so it's like, you know, there I should be identifying with him, and am I that, right? and it was a conflict.
Yeah.
I'll tell you later, kind of some of the culmination of it. How about the rest of you? Where are you at, and what questions did you ask that could not be answered? What which struggles did you go through that somebody couldn't quite lead you through, but helped you to move and convert?
Struggle, but my grandfather made sure that I thought he was the perfect man. so he would take me to the Presbyterian church and teach me how to be a good Presbyterian little girl and sit quietly and be, honoring God. And I think he actually took me there to poke him in the side because he would go to sleep. But so then we had a Black caretaker, Augusta, and Augusta gave me a new view. She taught me that in her church, they could sing about God, they could dance about God, they could be joyful because it was wonderful. And I thought, you can do that in church? She said, but don't try it in your church. Just try it. Love the Lord how you want. And so this was fine, and I always have. After that, I thought so many different ways, but then we're all different, but we're all God's beings.
Yeah.
So.
Sandy, you might need to describe that a little bit more because we have some past Presbyterians in here where praising God means you lift your eyebrows. Right? They don't always understand all that praising God stuff you just talked about.
Same minister that we mentioned a minute ago, Gordon, he said Presbyterians clap in their hearts.
Clap their hands.
Yes. But we had a Presbyterian minister who's no longer there because they asked her to leave, who introduced us to Borg, who introduced us to bonging on the peace symbol, so you would get like a Buddhist feeling, and these wonderful things that I couldn't wait to experience.
Yeah.
And that there's only one way to God. No, because people that haven't even heard of God are God's children. And she said, of course they are. This is what she and I and a few others believed.
Yeah.
But they asked her to leave.
And that's because she probably stepped on some of what they were calling the sacred.
Yeah.
Right? That it can't go past these limits of what is. And what she knew was that the isness that Borg talks about, that isness is larger than. The sacred is not defined in the simple ways we have. It goes larger than that. How about the rest of you? Where did you take some steps beyond the boundaries that life had taught you up to that point?
I think when we moved to Singapore in our early 20s, I had grown up Catholic and had, the very strict Catholic view of things, which became ever more progressive as I went through college and the year or two afterwards. But my realm was still a Christian realm. And then we went to Singapore, which is just an amazing combination of ancient Chinese traditions and Islam and Hindu traditions and Christian traditions. And in our neighborhood, we had people from all different backgrounds, and just seeing the way our Chinese neighbors worshiped, the things they lit up in their yards at certain festivals or put out in front, offerings to different purposes. It just was, I saw the sacred in those kind of traditions, and there was a they became part of what I saw as sacred, sort of what he was talking about with the panentheism, that everything is in God, and it wasn't just a Christian realm anymore. So that was amazing. Plus, there are so many holidays in Singapore because every single religious tradition gets a day off, and there's a lot of them.
It sounds like what they did a really good job of doing, Doris, is declaring the unknown God to you.
Yeah.
Right? The larger than what you'd known.
Definitely.
That's good. We all need that. But sometimes we're like that Presbyterian congregation. We don't think we do.
Yeah.
Right? And I'm picking on Presbyterians, but Methodists do it as well. and Catholics do it, and Baptists do it.
Really well.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
right.
Presbyterians just do it better.
Yeah. Quieter.
There's just so many ways that we limit God down to this big. And I like the word numinous, partially because I don't completely understand it. But just that sense of glow that it says, right? Because it's close to luminous, that sense of difference that it gives to us, that idea that there's something more that's there. Maybe the part that's hardest for me is that I can't control. Now I've learned to be better at not being able to control the whole of God, but all of my first upbringing taught me control. Know exactly how far God goes. And the numinous says, break out from that. Be more than that. Anyone else?
Well, I haven't said anything yet because I've been wandering through the wilderness a good part of my life. And I think I was even doing it today, going through Zoom, trying to find you guys.
We are in a different realm than normal.
Yeah, well, I found you. I finally found familiar people from this class and I go, this must be it.
Yeah.
Here I am. But I did, you know, reading his memories, you know, it brought back so many memories to me. And briefly, kind of the key thing it brought back to me is every time I'd go into a memory about something that he said in his youth, I realized overall that I had an absolutely incredibly happy childhood. And I've carried that with me. In fact, sometimes I haven't really even grown up, I think, trying to grasp that same childhood. But I had to say goodbye to God at one point because I was the little scientist that, you know, the stuff that was in the creed that we recited every Sunday. Now, this is in the EUB Church and the Methodist Church, United Methodist, but I was older then. It was just Methodist. And I was having problems with the concept of God. It was basically the big guy with the beard in the sky. And I like to think that I've gone beyond that because I've read a lot about with other religions, in other religions, and that's been important to me. And I've lived in a mini Singapore when I lived in Penang, Malaysia. So I know exactly what Doris is talking about. And I found it absolutely fascinating. And I maybe remember, I think it was last week that I said something about wanting to describe this one young Chinese guy that we knew had gotten to know so well, that he was a fine Christian young man, but he wasn't Christian. And that was eye-opening to me when I was there, that there were these wonderful people from many different religions. I knew Hindus very well personally, and one of them even showed me how to wrap a sari. And they were just delightful people, and the Muslims that we knew were really nice. We never discussed religion with them, and I never quite understood it. I got more of that when I lived in Saudi Arabia. But it just, you know, God is everywhere. Right. And so I go along with that. He's not that guy in the sky. But when I see these things written and it says, well, God says, God feels, God does this, when it personifies God, I do have trouble with that because I'm back to that big guy in the sky again. Yeah. And I don't want to be there.
But that thing is not completely bad. There's reasons to reject that. There's no doubt that we shouldn't have just the big guy in the sky, right?
Right.
But that idea of transcendence beyond us is really important. You know why that's important? Because it says God is not controlled by the things that you do, by the things that you want, by the theology that you've set up. Right? That's part of what the big guy in the sky is about. Part of why it was set up that way is because people that were writing early theology, the early books of the Bible, were experiencing things that were way beyond them, like a flood that wipes everything away. How the hell do you believe in a God when everything gets wiped out in that kind of a flood. And so they invented the story. I'm sorry if I hurt your theology by saying they invented the story of Noah.
No.
Right? To be able to describe how even in the midst of disaster, God is still present somehow. Right? And that's part of where that big guy comes from. That theology is that, okay, I don't understand everything. I can't. I have to trust in a larger than just me. The problem becomes when that's all that God is. And when God has been placed outside of the realm of the touchable. And so we rightfully struggle with some people's theologies, especially if what they're essentially saying, right now, I know that you hate this. I know that you're disagreeing with me, but you just have to trust me because I believe in the great big guy in the sky and you should too. And so they're trying to reinforce their own stuff over yours. And that's rarely as helpful as what people think it is. But we do it all the time, don't we? My big numinous experience, and I've had some really good ones, but my huge one had to do with how do I leave behind all of this that I know, right? How do I leave behind the grasp, the control, the I have it all figured out of Mormonism, and especially the stories that it was then telling about me. Because in that leaving, in that running away, I did very non-Mormonish things, very non-Christian things, right? Things that would disqualify me, right? And so I ran from God because God doesn't know me. God is only the unknown God. Then why do I want to have connection to that God? But as I was running, I was essentially asking that question, do you love me? And it all culminated on a mountain. And some of you might have heard this story before. Middle of the night, parked my car literally kitty-cornered across the highway, up towards Show Low, up that direction. Lights still on, and I screamed at the stars, which is where I'd kind of deposited God. And I essentially asked that question, do you love me? Maybe more of essence, can you love me? And I felt presence that said, I always have, I always will. I'm here with you. I've been here with you during this whole struggle. Now, when I speak those kinds of words, it puts some kind of vision in your head, some kind of maybe even words in your head that God said, yes, I love you. And I didn't hear words, but it sounds like I did. I didn't see a presence, but I felt the presence. And so as we try to describe those numinous things, as we try to put them into words, we do the best we can, and then later on have to give better definitions to them. I believe, for example, that Moses at the burning bush didn't really see a burning bush that caught on fire and never burnt. I think he went back to his buddies after whatever happened up on the mountain, and he said, man, something just happened to me, and it felt like fire was there, but not being, and I don't know what happened, but I felt something. And those buddies started telling the story. Look what's happening to Moses, because he's changed. And that's because he saw something burning up. Maybe it was a bush he saw burning up on the mountain, right? And they tried to give word. They tried to give word and form to that which happened. And we turn it back into a literal event. And I don't know about you, but I've seen burning bushes, but never ones that were not consumed. Fire did what fire did to bushes, right? And so we feel like we don't have the same kind of miraculous spaces as that. And yet, in my personal case, my moment on the mountain, my moment of knowing that God was present with me, changed everything for me. Changed my whole view of life and of self. In the larger world, it was small, but it was miraculous. And the tough part is we want God to help us build the ark. We want God to start burning the bush and not consuming it. We want God to do the huge miraculous instead of trying to figure out how the small miraculous is what is the life-changing, maybe even world-changing event. He deals with that when he talks about salvation towards the end of chapter 4. And how many have less than a like for how salvation has been defined in your world?
Yeah.
Because those that like to use that word a lot usually have a very narrow definition of what it can be. It's only this much. But think about it this way. How have you experienced the power of God? And for me, that is salvation. He gave at least 8 different things at the end of that chapter to be able to say, this is how salvation has happened for me. He said it's transformation. It's liberation from bondage. It's return from exile. It's light in the darkness. It's sight to the blind. It's life to the dead. It's food and drink. It's being saved from sin. All of those are ways that salvation have played out. For me, my moment was more of a liberation from bondage, the bondage of all that I'd been taught, that this is all that can be true. And that Jim could be loved outside of that was hugely freeing. How about for you? What is the salvation that your experience of God has given to you? You want me to put up that list for you? I think I can get it if you want it.
Well, I'll just say that mine was basically what I described earlier.
Uh-huh.
The bondage of believing in a particular image of God and believing in a literalist understanding of the Bible. So I feel like it was definitely felt like a salvation when a bigger world was open to me.
You got it, Jim.
And it is salvation. I want you to make sure that you know that type of experience is salvation experience. It's just not what your Baptist minister would recognize as salvation, right?
It's a liberation from bondage.
Yeah,
Really.
yeah, absolutely. How about the rest of you? There's the little list that he made. How have you experienced salvation?
I think for me, salvation most often comes as light in the darkness.
Mm.
When I'm particularly worried about something or grieving something, meditation and prayer bring that light back into my life. It gives me a way of seeing that whatever dark night I'm experiencing at this moment isn't forever. It isn't going to always be there. And so that's how I see salvation. And just on another note, the thing that helped me reclaim the word salvation was reading somebody, I don't know if it was Borg or Spong or somebody a few years ago, that said salvation comes from the Latin word that means health. And if you know Spanish, salud means health in Spanish. It comes from the same word. And so seeing salvation as coming from the word healthy made it much more easy for me to say, I've been saved.
Nice,
So,
nice.
because otherwise I wouldn't have ever said that.
And I think part of what we have to do, Doris, is we have to reclaim that. If they're the only ones talking about salvation, they're the only ones that are saved, whoever they are, then we lose some of the power of what is talked about again and again in our scriptures that talk about that saving power of God. And you're right, that giving health, whether physical or spiritual, is absolutely part of what salvation is about. What else?
Well, for me to tie into what I said about David and a couple of other things that have popped up in my mind is in a way return from exile, where you leave behind loneliness and realize that you are fully accepted by the God that is the part of every other person and being around you. And that's where I was, booting David out of my contact list because he was such a complete piece of scum.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden realizing that was the human experience, and all of a sudden being back in the God that exists in every single one of us.
Yeah.
Including me at that point.
The hard part about that, Jeff, is it wasn't just yourself who put you into that space. It was also the church around you that said that it can only be this much stuff, right? And you're outside of that, so you're exiled from the truth.
That's a good point. Good point.
And trying to figure out how to be that space of return for each other is huge.
Amen.
Right? The permission giving that we all need in that moment is beyond just ourselves. I think I joke about Baptists all the time because I couldn't be a Baptist today, but it was a Baptist who helped save me. His name was Brother Larry. And Brother Larry is dear to my soul because in the midst of my lostness, he sat with me and helped me find a way in front of me. And he saved me the way he thinks he saved me, but I got saved the way God was saving me. Does that make sense? And so I thank God for people like that Baptist preacher, even though he didn't know really what he was doing for me. I mean, he knew what he was doing for God, but he didn't know how he was helping me as much. But he returned me from exile. The rest of you, do any of these help you?
The light and darkness, I think, speaks to me. I was teaching in Fort Collins, a place that you've lived before, about 1960. And we were trying to start a family. And so I asked the secretary, this was in mid-year, they needed a sub for the rest of the year. So I said, I would love to do that, but we might be starting a family, and please let me know if there's the German measles, because it was all over the town. Well, there was, and they didn't tell me. And so my baby carried it for 4 months after I'd had the German measles. And I was, of course, very sad, but it was just like knowing that this isn't an end, it's a beginning. And I was very calm. And I was sitting there grading papers after it happened in the hospital. And my doctor came in and he says, I can't believe that you're calm after this because you tried so hard to have this child. And then because the secretary didn't want to hurt your feelings, she didn't tell you, and you lost it. And I said, that's not important. What is important is I know that a child will come. I know that this wasn't the time. I know that you've helped me all you can, because he was crying there. And
Yeah.
I said, you know, it's a dawn, it's a new time. We're going to start over. This is going to be fresh.
And that you have some possibility there in the midst of even that lost space.
Yeah.
Nice. And that's what I want us to talk about for the last 15 minutes or so, is not the conversion that you had, but what do you carry out of it that becomes your conviction? Why, how did you get converted? How did the world convert around you because of that experience? So when I think about my moment on the mountain, it was essentially that if God could love me in this space of unlovability, love was much grander than what I'd ever imagined. And so it took me outside of the who's saved and who's not, who gets God to be present and who doesn't, and put me in a space which fits in very well at St. Francis, the idea of choosing love in every moment. And so that was one of my big conversions, was that love is grander than our theology, essentially. What are the convictions that emerged out of your conversions? How did it change you?
Again, my big conversion was when I was a child, and I asked, what is this all about? I know that you're present. I know that you're always going to be with me. And that kind of settled me then. So I didn't have a picture of some big bearded man in the sky.
Yeah.
I had this feeling that came over me. And later on, I talked to my sister, and she said she had the same thing. We were just starting new with this feeling that things were going to be fine, that God is in charge no matter what. And so from then on, I went to Sunday school and learned all the things that they teach you in there. But it was so much bigger than that, the feeling that I had.
Good.
That's what's carried with me.
Nice. Thank you. How about the rest of you?
Well, I can tell the story that practically everybody at St. Francis can tell, but I always felt like I was a bit of an outlier. And because I didn't quite believe in God, but if I did believe in God, it would be a God with a sense of humor and a God with enough sense of self-esteem that he wouldn't care whether I believed in him or not. But that came from quite some time back. And like when I moved to Tucson, I hadn't been going to church. I didn't need to go to church. Now in the past, I'd been a Unitarian. In the past, I'd been I'm trying to think what it's called now. I'll give the wrong name. Church of Religious Science. And I know Jim knows about this. We've even talked about it before. It's science of mind. And it's very close to the Unity Church, kind of from the same background. But when I came here, I didn't look up any of those churches. I didn't need a church. I didn't feel the need for it at all. And I didn't feel incomplete or empty. But a friend of mine was joining St. Francis, and she wanted me to come. And I go, "You're joining a church?" Now, some of you have probably heard this story before. And she go, "Yeah." And I said, "Okay, I'll come. I'll watch." Well, so I came and watched the service where she joined the church, and David Wilkinson, was the pastor at the time. And I never left. I've been here ever since. And I just found a very, very comfortable place for me and for whatever I believed. And here I am. I mean, it's right. I don't know. I'm still the same person. I still don't believe in this God, but I think I believe in that God. And when I look into the eyes of other people, I see the eyes of God. And I got so much out of being a part of the asylum program when we were the Into project. It just moved me to see these kids, to see these people, and just to be around them. They're just beautiful. And the people that worked with it, like dear Doris, I'm surprised she isn't 6 inches shorter because she walked so much and did so much. But it's just, it's just all these incredible people in the church, the people that came in and we helped. I had a great time going on the first mission that Jim took us to down to Peru. And I didn't go the second time because I figured I didn't do much for them, even though they did an awful lot for me. It was just incredible. And so this is where I belong. And I don't have great moments to give, but I feel so good here. So I guess this is where God is, even on Zoom.
So let me ask this, Jenny, as you brought all of that not quite conforming attitude and belief system to St. Francis, I'll bet it probably fit in really well because nobody else at St. Francis has opinions about anything.
I know. I love it.
So I wanted to be clear that it's not because, people don't have opinions here that it works. It's something different. The places where I've been in where people have had opinion and tried to force everyone else to have the same. So if we go back to those 8 things I put up there, I experienced it as return from exile. So you have to return from exile also.
Okay, I did, Jim. I did.
Well,
Yeah.
but I mean, all of that language could fit in one way or another in different things,
Yeah.
but it may not be what's important to you.
Mhm.
If I'm not allowing you to be able to speak that your truth is more of a light from darkness type of salvation, because I'm so busy stuck on some other definition of salvation, then you're not going to find a space. One of the nice things is you can be proudly whatever you are here at St. Francis as a general rule. Well, about most things at least.
Yeah, as long as you're liberal.
Yeah.
Right. And that's one of the great things that I've realized is really important about St. Francis is not that people don't have opinions, because they do. It's that somehow in the midst of it, relationship is chosen over opinion. And that's not always true in churches, is it?
Right.
Our opinion, our theology, because we don't even call it opinion, we call it God's fact, right?
Yeah.
God's truth. And we turn it into everyone has to. And that's, I get why people do that. It's not helpful to me. And I'm guessing it's not as helpful as people often think it is. I'm sorry, I kind of interrupted to be able to say that. How about the rest of you? What are the convictions that you've carried out of all this?
Well, for me, the conviction that I have slowly come to, and I'm still working on it, full disclosure here, I'm still not anywhere near what I should be, but I have come to realize that my relationship with God isn't in the church, the polity, or the ritual. It's in the people.
Mm-hmm.
And the most joy comes to me when I realize that and see people as like me, judgmental, damaged, difficult, and then everything opens up, and I see a wholeness to the whole of life, the whole of this planet, and the whole of the universe. It's amazing.
Yeah. Thank you. Anyone else?
I guess the conviction for me, when I discovered a new idea of God and a new way of looking at the Bible, was first of all a conviction that what I had intuitively been feeling and thinking had some validity, which was wonderful. And it also gave me the conviction that this idea of we're all in God, God in us, gave me, again, an acceptance of what I'd already kind of considered about heaven and earth, that if God was to be at work in the universe, it was gonna require my being at work in the universe, my being hands and feet and eyes and ears, and creating either hopefully a heaven or a better place, or a hell if I ignore or choose to make things worse. So often in our prayers, Jeff and I will conclude with, give us the wisdom to know the right thing to do in this hurting world, and help us to be part of the solution rather than part of the problem.
And I don't know about you, but I've learned that I can be both.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. We are definitely builders of heaven and hell for each other. And to be conscious about doing one versus the other is huge.
It's why we have to keep repeating that prayer daily.
Why we have to keep repeating it. And the problem is that it's much simpler to say, I'm already saved, don't bother me any longer, because it solves the problem in my mind, just not in my actions.
My experience goes way back to when I was in elementary school, and we attended a small Methodist church, and I lived on a farm, and we had a small town of maybe 100 people nearby that had a Methodist, Lutheran, and a Catholic church, all three, and attended the Methodist church there. And I had a Sunday school teacher that really exposed us to social responsibility and inclusion. I mean, I didn't know anything about sexuality issues or anything, but in terms of racial inclusion, it was the time of a lot of the freedom marches, and she just brought in all kinds of things that wasn't getting anywhere else. And I found as I went forward that I sort of felt like out in society, I was coming from a different perspective than most of the people around me in a very conservative rural area. And it wasn't really until in college where I got introduced to theological courses that were taught by the Ecumenical Institute, where we were exposed to some of the theology of people like the Nevers and Bonhoeffer and Bultmann and Tillich. They gave me a whole other perspective that just kind of brought together thinking that was germinated back before, but seemed to be, I didn't really experience being in places that taught a particular view of salvation or ways that you had to believe, but I didn't feel like I was given any kind of framework that helped until that time. And it was interesting that maybe 15 years ago, I remember being at an annual conference up in Phoenix, and was sitting with Don Sapp, who I don't know how many of you know Don, but he was a very progressive clergyman. And I forget just what the conversation was around, probably argument about homosexuality. And he was talking about how in seminary, that he and all the others were exposed to these other ideas that didn't seem to exist at all in the conference thinking. And he was kind of struggling with why none of this got from the clergy being taught down to the congregations. And it's sort of like you were saying early on about the pastor saying that the congregations weren't ready for it. And, it seemed to me, it wasn't that the congregations were not ready for it. It was that the pastors were afraid of upsetting people. And Doris experienced this in meeting with various clergy who encouraged her about the stance and what she was saying about inclusivity. And the pastor saying, you know, I'm sure glad you're doing it. I just couldn't do that in my church.
You know, I think sometimes the hard part, Scott, is clergy have to figure out how to deal in the whole community. And sometimes we're not afraid of the community. We're afraid of Norma Tucker. Norma Tucker was Norma
Go ahead.
Tucker. Norma Tucker was the lady at my home church who controlled everything. And sometimes that's who we're afraid of, is who is that controlling person who, because of my action, then uses that to destroy. And that's and that's tough. We all have to sit in that space of how do we hold on to the truth of our conviction, even when there's going to be people that are disagreeable about it. Can we formulate both the conviction and the why behind the conviction strong enough, both within our own heart and in our words, to be able to say, this is why this is important? Do I get past my fear of Norma Tucker? You know, or whoever else it is that stands in the way there. And there's a whole bunch of people today who have pretty singular ideas about what should be true, right? It doesn't mean they have whole truth, because they're very sure about their truth. It means that they have found something that works for them. It doesn't have to work for you. Over the next little while, what we're going to be doing is over the next 3 weeks, we're going to be looking at 2 chapters or so a week. We've got an extra one we're going to have to toss in there somehow. There's 7 chapters, and we're going to look at 2 of them, and he's going to hold up, this is one of his convictions. And you get to look at it and say, okay, this helps me, or yeah, doesn't work for me. You get to look at why he chose this as one of his convictions, and you get to decide if it is also one of yours. And even if you don't accept the whole of what he says, how does it give you vision towards how you look at the same issue? How do you give voice to your conviction? At the end of the 5th chapter, the 4th chapter, he talks about near-death experiences. And I have an interesting relationship to near-death experiences because I've never had one, but I've known people who have. And I don't have to believe what they believe about the near-death experience to be able to see the power of what that experience is for them. And that's how I want you to try to read the next few chapters. See the power of what it means for him to have the convictions that he has. See the experiences that have brought him to be able to say, this is what I'm convinced at. And if it helps you to be able to say, I'm also convicted of that, then grasp hold of it. If your experience doesn't quite give you the same conviction he has, figure out what convictions your experiences have given you along the same lines. That's what we're going to try to do. Okay.
What chapters are those? Are we talking 6 and 7?
Yeah, I'm going to send, I'm going to start at 5. I'm going to send 5, 6, and 7 this next week. We may only get to 2 of them, but somewhere in there, we'll get a 3rd one done. So basically we'll do 2 chapters each of the next 3 weeks and 1 extra one of those weeks. Okay. So that'll be the pathway. All right.
Right.
Thank you very much for your time and for the sharing of your hearts.
Thank you. Nice to see everyone
you.
as always.
See you.
Yep. You too.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.